Welcome back, everybody, to episode number 6 of the Untangling Election 2021 podcast, your weekly podcast keeping track of the 2021 Canadian federal election. This episode is one of the ones I've been looking forward the most, not because of my guest, well, partially due to him, I hope, but also because it's tackling the Green Party, mainly because the Green Party seemed to implode in Canada over the course of about a year. So for the past few election cycles, Canada has had an active Green Party representing primarily climate issues. In 2019, they made their biggest splash yet, claiming free seats in the federal election and around 6.55% of the popular vote, which is a very substantial gain for what is typically considered the fifth or so party in Canada. However, this time around in 2021, they have been distinctly struggling. A number of high-profile and high-impact internal crises have caused major rifts to open in the party. How is this impacting their 2021 campaign? Can they replicate 2019's successes? And how is this all going to play out for their future plans? Let's discuss that today. Joining me today is my good friend Drake. How are you doing today, Drake?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm fine as well. It's been a tumultuous time getting you on today, but I think we've recovered, right?
Yeah, hopefully. No more computer crashes.
Yeah, it's funny because it's always a struggle doing this virtually, but it's been working out. I've been connecting well with people I haven't seen for a while, and I don't think we've seen each other for about 2 years now, right, Drake?
About 2, yeah, possibly 3.
Yeah, I still remember the first time I've met you. I think we were doing Model Parliament. We recruited you as our token Green chairperson. How do you feel about that?
You know, I had a feeling there was a reason I was invited to cover this particular topic.
I guess
Makes
so.
sense.
Because I remember when Yusuf and I, who was from a previous episode, we set up like a model parliament experience at the University of Waterloo. And Drake, we managed to recruit as about the only credible Green person on campus for this purpose. So I've always kept him in mind, although I think he's shifted somewhat in legions.
Yes. Yes, my membership has since lapsed.
Should we get a few of our biases off the table or something, or just talk about, I guess, who we are and how this might impact how we're going to cover the Green Party's collapse itself?
Sure, I'll go first. I'm Drake. I'm a 23-year-old software developer. I use he, him pronouns, and I first got into politics with the 2014 Ontario election. As was hinted, I had a Green Party membership for 5 years after Elizabeth May's talk about the Anti-Terrorist Act, what I got into the party with. And then it lapsed in 2020. And importantly, I did not vote in the 2020 leadership race.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that will impact, I think, your perception of the party today, because you kind of went from knowing a bit more of the internal struggles or how the party traditionally was to kind of being able to look at it with an outsider's lens and hopefully provide those perspectives, which I think would be making an illuminating discussion today. Fingers crossed, right? I myself, as hopefully you might know by now, I'm Simon. I'm a 24-year-old recent graduate. I recently obtained my Master's of International Relations studying in the Netherlands, but before that, I was at the University of Waterloo doing political science and philosophy. I don't have any strong party allegiances. I can't even vote in the Canadian election, funnily enough, because I'm not yet a citizen, but I'm working on that. But I do tend to lean a bit more socially progressive, but beyond that, I'm very neutral. And I guess what's relevant for today's topics, because we will be diving into the delicate issues of race and gender. I am myself, just to get it off the table, I'm a white, straight man and identify as such. And as Drake said, I also use he, him pronouns.
Yes, and I'm also a white man. So we will be very mindful when we get to the allegations of racism that's going to come up.
Yeah, and I think you're really kind of setting the tone well. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to the Green Party. But before we get to the Green Party, I just really quickly wanted to ask you, Drake, because you've always been a pretty politically affiliated person. What do you think of the 2021 election so far? Are you enjoying the ride, so to say?
That's a good question. I'm kind of enjoying it. O'Toole's really surprising me with how competent he is. Yeah, generally, I'm very excited to see the debates on September 8th and the 9th, and what's the result going to be, and how does that affect the leadership standings? Is Annamie Paul going to be the leader after this election? Is Justin Trudeau going to be prime minister after this election? I can't wait.
Yeah, it really seems a bit like a turning point for kind of Canadian political sphere, because I feel like in 2021 it's all going to shift a bit. Because I think the Conservative Party, as you're saying, O'Toole's looking very strong, but if he ends up underperforming, I can see the Conservative Party undergoing a shift. If Trudeau ends up underperforming, I can see the Liberal Party undergoing a shift. The NDPs look a bit more solid, but then the Green Party itself, I mean, they're completely in motion for the past few months already. So it's going to, I think this will be one of the more momentous elections, or one of the more, have some of the more lasting effects from what we've seen. Because I feel like 2019 we all kind of forgot about. It didn't change much, I guess.
Well, there's a reason why we may have forgotten about the 2019 election. I wonder.
Yeah. Should we get started about talking a bit about the Green Party?
Let's do it.
Yeah, so I think how we're going to outline or structure this episode today, because there's a lot to get through, a surprising amount about our fifth most popular party in Canada, I'd say. So we're going to start by just giving a bit of context of what the Green Party is and what they typically do. And then we're going to move a bit into the controversies which have struck them. And then we're going to give some more responses and perspectives on how that may manifest during this 2021 election campaign. So, Drake, do you want to start off by telling us a bit about who Canada's Green Party is and how they've traditionally been represented in Canadian politics?
Sure. The Green Party's been around for a very long time, and they're fairly different than the other parties in terms of how they're structured. I was a member of the Green Party for 5 years, and the power that you have as an individual member, and there's only about 40,000 members across the country, is tremendous. At one point, Elizabeth May sent out her personal email address to all of the members. I still have it. It's great.
As somebody who's worked in cybersecurity stuff, that is terrifying to hear.
It was a very weird domain, too. But that's one of the interesting things that we're going to touch on, is that the Green leader at the Green Party doesn't have the same level of power like the Liberal leader or the Conservative leader does. There's this governing body, the Federal Council, and they hold the real power. The leader of the Green Party is mostly just the chief spokesperson.
Yeah, it's interesting because I hadn't really realized that until we were talking beforehand about how this works. And it makes a lot of sense considering the controversies which are coming up. So I think it's important to keep in mind.
For sure. As you said, the Green Party had their best ever showing. They've elected now their third ever elected MP, Jenica Atwin, to the House in the 2019 election. It was their best ever election since 2008. Back then, they took 6% of the vote. 2019, they took 6% of the vote. And in 2008, they didn't win any seats. Elizabeth May tried, failed to win her seat in Nova Scotia, and the Green Party did not get its first elected member until 2011. So times are changing.
Yeah. And I think it also is important to note that I think the role of the Green Party in the Canadian psyche has grown a lot too. They used to be known as like, oh, if you're a hardcore environmentalist, that's where you end up. But nowadays, it's more rational-minded persons like you, Drake, who seem to really avidly not only embrace the green environment aspects, but also some of the more social policies which they promoted.
For sure. That's been something that internally amongst party members they would talk to about how do they shake the perspective of just being a one-issue environmental party and show that they have a platform with more things that they cover, justice and housing and affordability and all of those things. And so it's been fascinating to watch that evolve since I joined the party in 2015 to today.
Yeah, of course. Do you want to talk a bit about maybe the Elizabeth May era of how the Green Party was?
Certainly. Elizabeth May was elected leader in 2006, and she is the reason I joined the Green Party. It was her speech on Bill C-51. I heard it, and I was like, wow, this is someone, I really like how they're approaching this rationally. She never actually wanted to get into politics. She had become an ordained minister and has like a doctorate in religion or something like that, but jumped into politics because she didn't like what Harper was doing with the environment. Elizabeth May, for the longest time, was the Green Party. She's held her seat since 2011, and that's been one of the biggest challenges. And why she stepped back in 2019 was because she wanted the party to grow beyond her. She didn't want it to always revolve around Elizabeth May is the Green Party. She wanted it to become something bigger than herself.
Yeah. And I think that's very noble of her to do. You don't see that many party leaders taking that kind of role, because I think she was really actively she really actively cared about how the party performed and for the issues that she was advocating. But I also kind of sympathize, because I think it's also really easy to get tired of politics, especially if you're not a politically oriented person. Because I feel like she was more really passionate about the issues and not per se about the practice of politics itself, even though she did excel in the debates and stuff like that. So I guess that left us in end of 2019, beginning of 2020, with a party whose main figurehead was stepping down and the future was looking ahead. But the future did look bright. They came off their biggest success yet. They had, I think, the most support they've ever had at that point in time. How optimistic were you in 2020 as a past Green Party supporter, Drake?
Well, I remember election night 2019, I was super optimistic and super hopeful that they were going to hit that magic number of 12 seats for official party status and hold the balance of power. So going into January 2020, I was following the leadership race. My membership lapsed before it was time to vote, and I didn't have an interest in renewing it. But I still followed it closely, and I thought things were looking great.
Do you want to tell us a bit about how the leadership race ended? Who ended up winning?
Well, so Annamie Paul narrowly beat out her eco-socialist opponent, Dimitri Lascaris. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. And she won on the 8th ballot by 2,000 votes. And it's worth noting that on the 4th and 5th ballots, she was actually trailing in second before retaking her lead. So it was a win, but not a very decisive one, in my opinion.
Do you want to introduce Annamie Paul as a person, perhaps, really quickly to the listeners?
Certainly. Annamie Paul has an amazing career that she's already had. She's worked for nonprofits. She's even worked for old parties. She's a very distinguished, well-educated, smart individual. And she made history when she was elected. She is Canada's first ever Black and Jewish federal party leader. And we can't ignore that is historic and nothing after the end.
Yeah, it is a very historic, because I remember she was elected while I was abroad, and I was surprised. Well, I wasn't really following the Green leadership race with any real eye on it whatsoever. But when I saw that Annamie Paul was elected, I didn't know who she was. But I remember reading her up, checking out her Wikipedia page, etc., etc. I was really impressed by kind of the resume she brought forth with the credentials she had and kind of like her experiences within the community. She seemed like an ideal person to kind of step up after Elizabeth May. And I think you were telling me earlier, too, that Elizabeth May did want her as her replacement, right?
Oh, yeah. She was Elizabeth May's clear favorite to win. Some people accused May of kind of putting her thumb on the scale. She held a fundraiser for Annamie Paul, despite pledging to remain neutral during the leadership contest. She claimed that was because Annamie Paul was an equity candidate, and she wanted to help promote Annamie Paul's leadership. And that's great, except that there were other equity-seeking candidates that Elizabeth May did not show the same level of support to. And the other ones were eco-socialists, where Elizabeth May falls on the more centrist side of the party. Same with Annamie Paul.
Yeah. So as Drake was explaining to me earlier, the Green Party is interesting because there is a split between more two factions. So kind of like if you know the Conservative Party, there's a progressive leaning faction like the Red Tories, and there's a more social conservative faction, right? The Green Party, as Drake was saying, has a similar split, right?
Yeah, so you have the eco-socialists, and those are the kind of people that Stephen Harper wakes up in a cold sweat about every night. They are his worst nightmare. They care about the environment, and that is eco's in their name, right? So it's their most important issue, but they are also very much focused on equity and justice and all of those things. The more centrist, and I do use that as a relative term of the Green Party, would be your Elizabeth May, your Annamie Pauls, where they care a lot about the environment and they want to promote justice and equity and social justice as part of pursuing environmental change as well. But it's a little bit more tempered and focused on working with the other parties, collaboration, pragmatism, those kinds of values. And that's generally, we've always seen the Green Party led by centrist candidates. No eco-socialist has ever won the leadership. But 2020, Dimitri Lascaris came the closest.
Yeah, but ultimately, I would say Annamie Paul prevailed, and the party seemed to be in a relatively decent state if an election would have been called in 2021, would you say?
Yes and no. I mean, middle of 2021, there were some allegations published in the Toronto Star about there being some internal conflict in the party, even back then, before it imploded on itself. And just complaints about the leadership style of Annamie Paul being standoffish and it not being a very happy, collaborative work environment. Now, it should be worth noting that Elizabeth May also had those allegations about her. And there was actually an investigation by the party into the workplace that she created. But I thought that was interesting, and I kind of was like, oh, I think it's just people aren't happy that Elizabeth May isn't leader anymore, and they're just making noise to the media. Possibly that was the case, possibly not.
I remember I read some reports along those lines as well. They floated up to me in Europe, I guess, but I tended to just dismiss them because I thought this was just maybe some more smear campaigns against the left-leaning parties in Canada, or just some more trying to attack them from their own values, right? I think most Canadians did until they were forced back into the spotlight recently.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that Annamie Paul's camp was also complaining and alleging that there were Elizabeth May loyalists in the party who were kind of pushing back on Annamie Paul and trying to keep the party organs loyal to Elizabeth May, which is an interesting kind of back and forth. So
True.
it's interesting to see that both sides were kind of complaining about each other when what we would have wanted to see was a unifying way of moving forward.
Yeah. So this all set us up in 2021. Election on the horizon. Everyone's getting ready to do a campaign, but meanwhile, the Green Party was on the verge of imploding. Do you want to run us through this narrative, Drake, about how this implosion happened and what? Basically, just run us through the details.
Certainly. So it's a bit strange that the Green Party's downfall begins with Israel and Palestine. As viewers may be aware, that conflict bubbled over in May, and all of the party leaders in Canada released statements calling for de-escalation to various extents. Annamie Paul puts out a statement calling for a de-escalation and a return to dialogue. Jenica Atwin, the MP for Fredericton, who was at that time sitting as a Green MP, subtweets her leader and says that her statement was completely unacceptable and called for an end to what she described as apartheid. And one of the other MPs, Paul Manley, agrees with her and is siding strongly on the Palestinian side of things, and that Annamie Paul's statement was not strong enough. So already we've got some internal party conflict going on here. Annamie Paul's senior advisor, a man of the name Noah Zatzman, goes on Facebook a few days after that, and he writes this post accusing people of anti-Semitism. He says that Jagmeet Singh is anti-Semitic. He accuses liberal NDP, conservative NDP MPs as being anti-Semitic, and he even says some Green MPs. He doesn't name them, but it's quite clear he's talking about Jenica Atwin and Paul Manley. And he goes on to talk about how he will work to defeat them, 2 of the 3 sitting Green MPs, and elect in their stead Zionist MPs instead.
That was when I read that really took me by surprise, because it seemed like such a strong messaging against what is your greatest electoral victory ever. I would be trying to prop up these candidates as much as I could if I was in control of the Green Party.
Absolutely. And so, of course, that goes out, the press jumps on it, and Annamie Paul is called upon to explain her position, and largely she dodges it. I remember watching press conferences, and she essentially would be asked a question, would listen politely, and then would give the same response, that it's an internal discussion. The Green Party allows differences of opinions, and she will not comment on it.
How did this squabble, if I can call it, end?
Some might say it's not over yet, but the next big event is on June 10th. Jenica Atwin, at a press conference with Dominic LeBlanc, a minister in Justin Trudeau's government, announces that she's crossing the floor to sit as a Liberal. And this is a huge loss for the Green Party. They had hoped that her election in New Brunswick would be a new masthead for the Green Party to expand in the Maritimes. We saw that the provincial Green parties are doing quite well in the Maritimes, and the federal party was looking to make some gains there, possibly in this election. So her crossing the floor, huge loss. And in press conferences, she says that part of the reason she left was Annamie Paul's leadership, which Annamie Paul did not appreciate in press conferences and generally denied any responsibility for Atwin leaving the party.
It's such an insane situation that has happened, because if you have 3 MPs, from my neutral perspective, you should be able to keep all 3 happy. It doesn't seem like that huge of an ask for a political party.
I know. It's like Justin Trudeau can walk into a caucus meeting and he somehow keeps 150 MPs happy, and none of them are crossing the floor. What's
Exactly. And
going on there that Annamie Paul can't keep three happy?
yeah, I mean, crossing the floor as an MP, I don't think that's extremely rare in Canada, right? It doesn't happen. I don't know any other prominent examples off the top of my head.
There was a Liberal MP who crossed the floor before the 2019 election. I can't remember her name, to sit as a Conservative. And
Yeah.
Andrew Scheer, who was the leader at the time, had a great time parading her around as, you know, this Liberal candidate who's crossed the floor. He even made her deputy leader of the party for her crossing the floor to the
Yeah,
Conservatives.
that rings a bell, but it's still like you don't remember her
Oh, it's
name.
very rare.
And
Yeah.
it's just, and you don't expect it from such a small party who has such limited resources already. But
Yeah.
regardless, so that's I think that controversy somewhat tackled. What happens next in your timeline, Drake?
Whew. Well, Annamie Paul continues to have regular press conferences. She basically goes on any media show that will have her on and listen to her, which is interesting because, in my opinion, she wasn't handling Atwin's Crossing particularly adeptly. And you can have your difference of opinion on Israel Palestine. That's totally fine. But the savviness of how she handled Atwin crossing the floor, in my opinion, wasn't really up to par. Part of how she was handling it is it's kind of felt like she was just throwing things at the wall to see what would stick. At one point, she eventually came out in a press conference and said that Justin Trudeau is, quote, no ally and no feminist, accusing Trudeau of trying to deliberately destabilize what she described as her historic leadership, which to me kind of rings hollow because it denies that Atwin had any free will in choosing to leave the party for the Liberals, and she's just throwing it squarely on Trudeau. That did not fill me with great confidence in her ability to lead the party.
Yeah, and I think also attacking Trudeau for not being a feminist, whereas I would call Trudeau our most feminist prime minister Canada has ever had. Even though he might not be traditionally, he still embodied feminist values to a greater extent than any previous prime minister. It seems a bit jumping the gun too much. It seems like too harsh of a criticism to levy at him. I mean, he has his critics, and I know there's more he could have done for like feminist rights and stuff like that. But I think he identifies as a feminist, and many of his actions do kind of support that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, is there room to improve? Absolutely.
Mhm.
But every item in any federal budget now has to go through a gender evaluation before it's included in the budget to make
Yeah,
sure that it's not perpetuating any kind of gender imbalance. Like
yeah,
he's definitely putting his words into action on gender equity as best he can.
yeah. And I mean, even like Canada under Trudeau internationally has become much better known for pushing gender issues. So, for instance, I mean, I was working in the Netherlands in a think tank, and we were doing work for like cyber diplomacy, and Canada pioneered like a gender bill for cyber diplomacy. That was the big contribution, which everybody was kind of like appraising and stuff. So it has he's furthered this cause undoubtedly, and I think levying that criticism at him is a bit. It seems a bit like you were saying, just throwing anything and seeing what sticks, which is not a good look for a leader.
No. And so party is clearly displeased. And as we talked about, the federal council really holds the power over the Green Party, not the leader. Annamie Paul is one person on a council of 18. And so the federal council moves to have a vote of non-confidence in Paul's leadership in the middle of June. And how that kind of works, because again, the Green Party is weird, is that 75% of the councillors have to vote no confidence, and then the party membership would get to vote. And that is how they could get rid of Annamie Paul as leader, because the council blamed Annamie Paul for Jenica crossing the floor and defecting to the Liberals. So Paul's initial response was to say that there's a small group of council members who are already leaving because the Green Party was having federal council elections soon anyway, and she wasn't concerned. That later evolved into also claiming racism and sexism in the party, and that was fueling this urge and desire for them to try and force her out of the leadership. And she committed to staying on as leader. And I was not a member during this time, so I can't comment on any kind of communication going to the membership or how the federal council vote went, as general public members are not allowed to sit and observe meetings like that.
You wish you still had your membership, right? Just so you could
I could
observe.
have I could have bought one, but I chose not to.
Not worth the price of admission, I guess.
Well, I mean, I guess not.
Sorry, go on.
So, for some kind of both sides context to this, the TIE, a paper based in British Columbia, had some reporting that Annamie Paul and Jenica Atwin met in May, and it was a very emotional meeting. And allegedly, Jenica Atwin pleaded with Annamie Paul to listen to her. And leading up to this meeting, she had been trying to get an Annamie Paul email address that was active, because she kept sending these emails and never getting a response. Again, allegedly, Annamie Paul in this meeting said that she had received these emails, but decided not to respond.
So she ghosted her.
Essentially, yes. The leader ghosted one of her sitting caucus members.
One of her 3 sitting caucus members.
Exactly. She ghosted 1/3 of the Green Party caucus. We cannot emphasize this enough. And so that is not a great look. Again, this is all reported, alleged information. And part of the non-confidence vote is that they have to present a written document of why there's this non-confidence vote. And it was hastily done. The entire document was also leaked to the press, which is, again, not a good look for a professional party that wants to be taken seriously in Canada. But the document, before it was leaked, Paul went on to say that it was quite poorly written, and it kind of fell into the stereotype of painting her as an angry black woman, fueling those stereotypes and her calls of racism within the party. The other spicy little tidbit is, before the confidence vote, the Tie also reports that Annamie Paul had an hour-long meeting with Elizabeth May and threatened Elizabeth May with consequences if she did not 100% support Annamie Paul at the council meeting. And Elizabeth May attended the council meeting, but left before the vote began. And again, worth noting, Elizabeth May does not have a seat on council, but her husband, John Kidder, does. They say that they keep like a wall between that and it doesn't come home, but, you know, how much you believe in that is your choice. And I don't actually know how John Kidder voted on that non-confidence vote at all. But the outcome was that Annamie Paul lives on to fight another day. She is staying as leader. Should be okay, right, Simon?
I mean, you'd hope so, right? You'd hope so.
Yeah. How much money do you think the Green Party has on hand? Do you think they're doing well?
I was going to ask you the same question, but you prepared better than I expected. I think they have around $300,000.
Well, so I actually don't know how much money they have in the bank, but I can tell you what their deficits were. In May, they ran a $100,000 deficit, and in June, it was a $130,000 deficit, which, for a small party, that's not great. They've been doing excellent fundraising. They've been fundraising better than ever under Annamie Paul. But in one quarter, they pulled in $660,000. So running a $100,000 deficit on that level of fundraising, not a great look.
Yeah, and we'll get into the budgets later, but it would have me worried too. More worried than the reports of Tom Mulcair taking out like a 7th mortgage on his house to finance the NDP party back in 2019. But that's a different story.
No, for sure. But how it kind of manifests is that the federal council has a vote to withhold $250,000 in funding to Annamie Paul's riding for her election campaign. That was money that had been promised to her riding, but they just couldn't afford to give it. And so, sorry, Annamie Paul, the party's not giving you a dime to fund your campaign. And they laid off a bunch of staff. And further kind of going on to this back and forth between Annamie Paul as leader versus the federal council, at a virtual meeting where they were talking about the personnel cuts that they had to make, Annamie Paul was pushing back against these cuts and was really unhappy about them. And so the interim executive director of the federal council had Annamie Paul muted during this meeting.
This is starting to sound a bit petty.
Yeah. Now, fortunately, 2 of the attendees, unnamed people, refused to speak until Annamie Paul was unmuted and allowed to finish her remarks. But again, this is information that we know because it leaked to the press, totally furthering the damage to their credibility as a party that can get things done and has their shit together.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks being muted on a call, but it sucks even more when you're the leader of a party and then being completely blocked out. So I can see like both sides. I know, like I said a second ago, it seems like some high school level of pettiness kind of going around here. But
yeah, it's super unprofessional. And so, again, survives the confidence vote. All this, you think, shouldn't the party, we think there's going to be an election, shouldn't they be coming together? No, the party looks to try and review her membership and strip her Green Party membership away, which would be a constitutional question for the Greens if she could still be the leader without being a Green Party member. And so how that resolves, and they threaten another non-confidence vote if she doesn't finally say no and repudiate her former advisor and say that she supports the Green Party caucus, something she never did. And so Paul has chosen to go to the Green Party arbiter, and that arbiter decides that, hey, non-confidence vote, membership review, off the table. You can't do that. No to the federal council. And for a little while, it looked like, okay, that's the end of it. We can be a big, happy family again. Right, Simon?
I mean, you just try to get rid of your family, like, head by trying to shoot her, basically. So
exactly. So how do you think it goes from here?
I think they all settle down, they get their fundraising together, and run a really successful, really, like boots on the ground 2021 federal election campaign, right?
Right. And the way you do that is by filing a motion in Superior Court of Ontario suing the arbiter and the leader of your party, right? That's how that works?
I've never heard of that strategy, but maybe the Green Party is forward-thinking, right?
Yeah, super forward-thinking. Yes, the party argues that the arbiter overstepped its authority and had no right to talk about that because Annamie Paul's contract is with the party fund and not the federal council. And so they take it to court and they want that arbiter decision set aside, and they want to recover costs of the lawsuit from the leader of the party.
Yeah. Sorry.
We're both chuckling here because, like, you just can't write that. You can't make it up.
Who elects a leader they're going to try to sue for her personal wealth to pay off a lawsuit on an issue you disagree with, which you could have seen coming up while electing her? But yeah. Did you see the cost of these lawsuits?
I didn't actually. Do you have it?
Okay, apparently they spent. Remember how I said they had a $300,000 in budget which they could use?
Yep.
So $100,000 of that was spent on a lawsuit. This lawsuit. They, in their wise election decision, said, so we have $200,000 left, right? Should we support our candidates with that money? Guess what they did?
They said it's for more lawsuits. They're going to sue the candidates too.
They set $100,000 apart for future lawsuits in like a fund.
I mean, that just seems like the pragmatic thing to do. Like, if you're expecting more lawsuits, I mean, clearly.
Yeah, clearly not trying to win the election, which holds the key to your success. I think we're maybe slandering the name a bit too much here, but I'm just saying it doesn't make sense to a layperson like myself. But so how is this mess all ended? How is it today? I think we're up to almost present day, right, Drake?
We're pretty up to present day, and really, actually, no, that is the end of it. They've taken it to court. Nothing's come from it. And Annamie Paul put out in the press that, she is focusing on this election and, will deal with the outcome of all this internal party strife afterwards. Some happy things for Annamie Paul is that the federal council elections have gone forward and that there are some more Annamie Paul loyalists now sitting with her on federal council. And that's got to be a huge relief for her that if they try and have another non-confidence vote, they definitely don't have the support to do it. And, now we're in the election and she's trying desperately hard to win her seat in Toronto Centre.
Yeah, but on the more sadder note, I don't think she has any financial support from her campaign, I think, really. Because I don't think she hasn't gotten that $250,000. And if you do realize, I was looking at how much campaigns cost. I think most candidates spend from like the Liberals and the Conservatives, they spend between $50,000 to $100,000 on a campaign. She doesn't have that support. That $250,000 would have gone so far, especially in her riding in Toronto Centre, which she's against a very prominent Liberal MP who is very well respected as well. So, and also, I believe she's also said she's not going to be campaigning outside of the Toronto riding, which I thought was as a federal party leader, sure, it's COVID, but you still want to be boots on the ground, visiting other ridings and making sure your message gets spread, right?
Or at the very least doing what Aaron O'Toole is, and he has like a studio built in the Westin here in Ottawa that he is at least twice a week to do like teleconferences. And he says that it's apparently working very well. So she could still stay in her riding, but still be trying to help other Green members get elected across the country. As it is right now, according to polls, the only sitting Green person who's going to win re-election is Elizabeth May. Paul Manly's seat is a huge toss-up right now.
Yeah. I think touching on like the polls. The People's Party of Canada have more support in the polls right now, or projected support, than the Green Party, which is insane.
Absolutely. And it's fine to have disagreements internally. What's not good is that it was just constantly both sides leaking things to the press. And this whole scandal played out in the media, shooting all credibility of the party. Like, I don't see how many people, unless they're super dedicated to like the principles of the party, are voting Green this election. It's pretty disappointing.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I don't know if you've been listening to these episodes, but the Green Party has been the joke we've all been saying throughout these campaigns. Whenever we bring up the Green Party, we all laugh now, which they had such respect in 2019. They were at their high. Everybody, like you were saying, you thought they might even win 12 seats in Canada. But
well, that was partially a bit of a hope.
It was a hope. But you would never even think of entertaining that hope as a serious, rational-minded person today, right, Drake?
Oh, absolutely not. I ask myself more, what outcome happens that allows Annamie Paul to stay on as leader? Does she just need to win her seat?
Mm-hmm.
How many more seats does the Green Party need to win in this election? Under Green Party rules, after every election, that the Green Party doesn't form government. So basically, after every election, there is a review of the leader. And the membership get their say, and I think it's a 60% threshold. If they don't get that, they're out as leader. There's a new leadership race. And never before has that really been a question for any Green Party leader. But it's going to be interesting to see Annamie Paul, and will she retain the support of the membership after this election?
Yeah. And I think one of the more depressing aspects of this whole debate is that while the Green Party itself hasn't really had a strong policy position in Canadian Parliament, they've always been very on the forefront of pushing green issues and climate change issues, as well as some more socially progressive issues in the latter few years. And now that voice just seems to be a bit absent. I don't know how it's going to happen in debates, because Annamie Paul is attending the debates, so we'll see how that translates. But right now, and I think it's really telling by the fact that people said before this election campaign, or a few months back, they said climate change is going to be the big issue Canadians focus on. But instead, the NDP managed to hijack the agenda and focus instead on affordability. Do you attribute some of the absence of maybe the green issues within our current discourse on the lack of the Green Party being a strong voice in Canadian politics?
I think yes. I think it's a huge loss that Annamie Paul is staying within her riding. I understand why, because it's going to be a close race. And that's being generous. Right now, it looks like it's a pretty easy Liberal win. But the Green Party is focused on the environment first and foremost. And parts of our country are on fire. We've had the heat dome. This is an election where the environment is pretty front in a lot of people's mind. And the fact that the Green Party is largely absent, except for this drama that played out in the presses, it just feels like a huge lost opportunity for them. They should be on the forefront talking about what the science says and what they are going to do to get us there. Instead, Annamie Paul just recently said, if you want to know what our climate policies are, Google them. We have a platform coming, but it's going to be much the same as 2019. Voters can Google what it is while we put out our platform eventually.
I thought it was such a ludicrous statement when I read that. I was appalled because, in my opinion, saying in any debate on climate change, it's always being on the forefront of the issue, proposing new innovative solutions, and saying, look at our 2019 platform from 2-3 years ago. I think that just shows such a lack of imagination and solutions coming out of the party, just being embroiled in internal squabble. They're not doing anything to forward to debate. They're just saying, oh, look what we did in the past when you seem to like us.
Exactly. I mean, to be fair, looking at the environmental plans of the NDP and the Liberal, they have kind of cribbed some ideas from the 2015 and 2019 green environmental plans. Retrofitting buildings, fee and dividend carbon taxes has been Green Party policy for decades now as their preferred way of fighting climate change. So there is it's not that their ideas are really outdated, but it just seems politically dumb to say, we'll put out a platform. In the meantime, Google it.
Yeah.
Not to poo-poo Canadians, but we're busy. Not everyone's like me who spends every hour of the night reading all the various news sources. You need to have targeted releases of platform planks so that you can say, hey, we're credible. Here's what we want to do. Vote for us.
Yeah, I really hope they get the platform out before the first debate, because if not, I think whatever things she brings up, she has no frame of reference to make those claims. I think it's simply her saying a statement, and then her opponents will just say, so where's your plan for this? You have no platform out there. There's nothing for voters to reference back to how this is going to be put into action. I think it'll be such a poor showing.
Yeah, put it this way. Aaron O'Toole has a more concrete environmental plan, thought out, they're in the process of getting it costed, than the Green Party of Canada.
Yeah.
What world do we live in?
Exactly. I think, considering we do live in this world right now, and it is a reality, and I mean, there's a lot of things that are reality nowadays, which I wouldn't have said 2 years ago, thanks to the pandemic and everything. But regardless, what's your most and least optimistic predictions for the Green Party this election?
Least optimistic, they lose every seat.
And I think that's a distinct... I mean, I don't want to say Elizabeth May has a chance of losing her seat because it's such a staple of Canadian politics for her in the last decade to have her seat. But, yeah.
I think it's unlikely. Like, she continues to win her seat comfortably by a pretty wide margin. I think it was like 48% of the vote last time round. And she's pretty well liked. I have some friends who actually live in her riding, and she's very locally popular. But that is probably the worst outcome. And already the party's kind of showing that without Elizabeth May at the helm, it blows up. And was it really the Elizabeth May party all along? It's a really sad state of affairs. Most optimistic. I don't think they're going to go anywhere near official party status. I think optimistically they retain their 2 seats and maybe pick up a third. And I don't even know if that third seat's Annamie Paul's.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very depressing that that's our most optimistic prediction from this, considering their performance in 2019. If you asked me in 2019, what's your most optimistic prediction for 2021, if that were to happen, I would have said they would have gained official party status. And that should have been the goal they could have worked for. And I think that could have been our most optimistic prediction for them, should they have had a more stable party internally. And I think Annamie Paul could have been the person to lead them to that victory had the party not imploded.
Well, there's still hope, you know. She could pull off an upset in Toronto Centre. I think if she does win her seat, she has a pretty strong way to argue that she should stay on as leader. And maybe in 4 years' time, assuming there's a majority government elected, who knows? It doesn't look probable at this point, but 3 weeks is a long time in politics. You know, maybe in the future we're looking back on this as like growing pains, and then the Green Party goes on to become a contender for the third place party in the House. It feels weird that that's where we're setting the goal, but I think that would be huge.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I have more advanced reservations against Green parties succeeding in the modern era of politics as we have it, considering I feel personally that their agenda has been incorporated, or I guess swallowed up by other left-leaning parties. Like in 2005, let's say, a Green Party would have such distinct goals of climate change and environmental protection that aren't seen in mainstream parties. Whereas nowadays, the liberal parties, which are technically the centrist parties, basically mimic all the Green Party targets. So I don't know how that spells out for the future sustainability. And I mean, having participated in the Dutch election, the Green Party there underperformed massively, and I kind of attribute it to the same kind of, mainstream appeal of their issues, which other parties have adopted. But that's, I guess, more food for thought, right, Drake?
For sure. And I mean, I think it's a credit to Jagmeet Singh that he's attracting the youth vote, the people that the Green Party would be targeting, who care about the environment, these social justice issues. And I don't know really any of them that are voting Green. The only person I know who's voting Green is my mother, and that's because she doesn't like the other three parties, and so she's going to throw her vote there just to say that she voted.
It's sad. Yeah, no, it is very sad. I don't know what else to say about it, because I think that any party has a role in Canadian politics, and I think that the Green Party especially had a very strong role as a single party issue for the last while, really advocating and making sure those issues got represented in Canadian Parliament, regardless of your stance on climate change or environmentalism.
And just generally, I loved Elizabeth May.
Yeah.
even as a single MP, she knows everything you need to know about parliamentary procedure and does everything in her power to work collaboratively with the other parties where possible. And generally, like, she's been voted the hardest working parliamentarian of 2014. She's well recognized by her peers, and she did a lot of hard work when she was in there by herself, literally running from committee meetings to committee meetings, and through the kindness of MPs from the other three parties being given time to speak, because she's not an officially recognized party. I'm coming off as a huge Elizabeth May fan, aren't I?
Kind of, but I mean, I think most people who lean in, I guess, centrist or left in Canada do really appreciate the role Elizabeth May has had in the past 10 years. And I think almost every Canadian will say she's been an effective advocate of the people she represents.
Exactly. She's had her issues, but by and large, she's a dedicated hard worker focused on working with everyone else to build consensus and move forward. And I think if every politician had that same kind of goal in mind, we'd be a better country for it.
Yeah. I guess we do have to wrap it up sometime today. But, technically it's spilled into the next day, considering the time we're recording this at. But, any final thoughts you want to leave us on, Drake?
I hope whatever happens in this election, whatever happens with Annamie Paul's leadership, the Green Party is able to rebuild from this, redevelop their internal party structures, because clearly something's not working given that this scandal played out how it did, and that they can re-enter Canadian politics, reintroduce themselves to Canadians, and regain the credibility that they've lost. I think they still have a role to play in Parliament, advocating not just for the environment, but on other issues, working collaboratively. I think they can be very constructive in Parliament if they can put this behind them and figure out how to rebuild that credibility they've lost.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's a good vision to have and a good hope to hold out for, given what's happened. So, before we end, and I know we've been going for a while, but before we end, I always like to end on a fun personal question. Right, Drake? Are you excited for what our personal question is for today? So,
So excited.
This podcast is a long one. Some might say it's a movie, right?
Where's this going?
So, my personal question is, we get to cast each one of the party leaders in a genre of movie. Where are we casting them?
Okay, so the easy one is Aaron O'Toole is obviously going into any kind of like action flick.
I would
because
put him
man served in the army.
I would specifically put him in like a spy thriller.
Totally. He'd be like the hip suburban dad on the block, like barbecuing up and spying on the KGB neighbors or something.
Yeah, and he has like a garage full of gadgets or something, drives a cool car, Then all of a sudden, his life gets turned upside down. He's no longer mowing the lawn. He's chasing the KGB out of this country.
Exactly. Let's see. I think...
Not so easy, is it?
No, it's really not. I've listened to some of these questions on previous episodes and been like, oh, that's an easy answer. And then some of them I'm like, how do you come up with a smart response to that?
How about we go by category movie? So I'm going to throw out a category and you say who you think's going in there. So let's say romance movie.
Oh, easily Justin Trudeau.
I would put him specifically, that was my thought too. I would put him specifically in like one of those traveling romance movies where they go to an exotic locale and go on like a journey across like the Indian desert like his father did maybe. And then
exactly. He walks on and all the girls are like as they look at him.
Yes. Where would you put Jagmeet Singh? Because he's the enigma. Because I feel like he could slot into so many different genres. Where would you want to see him excel?
If he were younger, I could see him being in a very well done like coming of age movie. Although he's a little old for that. I don't know. I think he is an enigma. He could slot in many places. Maxime Bernier, I think, goes into a horror movie quite easily.
Sure.
And purely based on title, we put Yves Francois Blanchette in Independence Day.
That's a good shout. I like that. I think that's a great shout. I would say maybe for Singh, we put him in like a superhero movie.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll 100% take that.
Yeah, I don't know why that was just the last one then. Because in my mind, the ones remaining were like superhero, fantasy, or crime. I feel like you wouldn't put him in a crime movie because I feel that's a bit like, detrimental to his character. Maybe a fantasy movie. I could see him being like a wise wizard or something.
But are you saying that just because he has a beard?
I was thinking of that while I was saying that, but yeah.
And then I'll ask you the hard one. What movie are you putting Annamie Paul in?
Oh,
Is it a political thriller?
that's the easy one out. I would put her in. And notice I'm glancing at my movie collection to decide, right?
Of course.
I would put her.
I didn't have an answer, which is why I asked you.
I would put her in a comedy because she seems most out of place, and that would be funny.
Okay. I'll accept
Like the
that.
straight person in like a comedy movie where everything goes wrong around them.
Okay.
Like not reflecting on her character or anything. Like not saying like, "Ooh, comedy," because haha, the funny situation they're in. But just like I would want to see her reacting to like her world like being thrown upside down, something like that. Which is the kind of situation she is in. But anyways. uh, well, I hope you're happy with our movie list we made. Well, thank you for joining us today, Drake. I really enjoyed having you on. I'm sure we'll have you in the future on another episode or two. Maybe not another like hour or 50-minute long thriller, which I think we're going to be editing up later today. But thanks for joining us. I enjoyed myself immensely. If you also enjoyed this episode, you, the humble listener listening in, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, tell me how I'm doing. I always appreciate hearing some feedback, and share around with your family and friends. Our next episode, which I'm in the midst of planning, I think should be on more of a rural look at Ontario, looking at what issues impact rural voters and small business owners and how that may impact how they lean in this election. So a bit more of a, I guess, personal leaning episode. But yeah, I think that's it for today. So thanks for joining me, Drake.
Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. It was a pleasure to catch up again. Till next time then, everybody. Bye.
Bye.